Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a major development in the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, an aggressive counter-move by the Ukrainian forces that is sending shockwaves through Moscow and beyond. This is not just another skirmish, we're talking about strategic shifts, psychological impacts, and the broader implications for the war and global geopolitics. Let's begin by setting the stage. The war between Ukraine and Russia has been grinding for years, steadily evolving from large-scale maneuvers into more complex and multi-dimensional warfare. One of the most striking shifts recently has been the way Ukraine is launching operations that are intended not only to contest territory, but to strike into Russian depths, infrastructure, supply lines, logistics hubs, and border areas that were once thought to be relatively safe for Moscow. For example, Ukraine's drone campaign has reached deep into Russian territory, striking oil refineries, fuel depots, logistics nodes, and thereby exposing vulnerabilities in what had been considered secure rear areas for Moscow. Now, the latest phase involves a concerted counterattack by Ukraine in the Eastern Front, particularly in and around the town of Pokrovsk in the region around Dobropilya. According to the analysis, Ukrainian forces are mounting operations that aim to disrupt Russian enveloping maneuvers, relieve pressure on critical sectors, and force Russia to react rather than dictate the tempo. What makes this moment significant is not just the fighting on the ground, but the signals it sends. For Moscow, seeing Ukraine taking the initiative, striking deep, and altering the dynamic means that the psychological and symbolic balance is shifting. It suggests that Ukraine is no longer simply defending, but is able to actively contest even Russian-dominated areas, or at least make Moscow feel unsafe. That has real consequences for morale, for the Russian public narrative, and for international positioning. Let's walk through several key dimensions to fully understand what is happening, why it matters, and what might come next. The tactical dimension of the counterattack. In the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya axis, Ukrainian forces appear to be executing a clear strategy: target a flank of the Russian advance, interrupt their supply lines, and prevent a full encirclement of Ukrainian positions. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainian units have recently advanced and regained ground that the Russians had previously infiltrated, especially in the northern part of Pokrovsk and the road linking Pokrovsk and Rodinsk via the H-32 highway. The result? Russia's attempts to encircle Ukrainian forces are being slowed, and the initiative is shifting. Importantly, the counterattack is not only defensive in nature. While holding the line is critical, Ukraine is choosing to press on sectors where Russia is vulnerable, forcing Russian troops to stretch, to defend, and to react. That in turn reduces the momentum of Moscow's direct offensive efforts elsewhere. The strategic implications for Moscow's war effort. When Ukraine forces push back effectively, it imposes multiple burdens on Moscow. It forces Russia to divert troops, resources, logistics, and command attention from other fronts to plug gaps and respond to the Ukrainian moves. It signals that Russian rear areas and supply routes are not safe, increasing the cost and risk of offensive operations. It undermines Russian narratives of invincibility and local dominance, both for troops and publics. It may degrade Russian operational tempo. When a force must shift posture from offense to defense, the initiative and timing advantage fade. In short, the counterattack is creating a situation where the locus of action is less exclusively in Moscow's hands. For a war where momentum, surprise, and initiative matter a lot, that shift is meaningful. The psychological and symbolic dimensions. Wars are not only fought with bullets and tanks, the narrative, morale, and symbolic dimension matter. For Ukraine, being able to hit into Russian border regions, to push Russian forces back, and to regain initiative is a morale booster, both domestically and for international audiences. For Russia, seeing that Ukraine can mount operations beyond mere defense, and that Moscow's territories or rear areas might be vulnerable, is a blow to confidence. Consider, for example, that earlier Ukraine had mounted drone strikes deep into Russia, targeting key infrastructure and thereby sending a message of reach and vulnerability. Those actions may have laid groundwork for the current dynamics, demonstrating capacity, will, and ambition. The wider geopolitical fallout. This Ukrainian counterattack has implications not just for the immediate battlefield, but for the wider war and geopolitical considerations. It may influence how Ukraine's international partners view its capacity and thus what kinds of support they are willing to provide. If Ukraine is seen as gaining the initiative, it may build confidence to invest further. For Russia, increasing defensive burdens strain resources, logistics, manpower, and may raise internal pressures, economically, politically, socially. The more Ukraine is able to contest Russian offensives and threaten Russian rear areas, the more leverage Kiev has in any future negotiations or broader strategic framing. The war's nature may shift again, from defensive attrition into more contested maneuver warfare where Ukraine sets the pace rather than simply reacting to Russian moves. Risks and uncertainties. Of course, nothing is certain, and counterattacks carry risks. A few to keep in mind. If Ukrainian forces overextend or move prematurely without logistic support, supply lines, or clear holding terrain, there's the danger of counter-encirclement. Russia still possesses large resources, heavy armored units, and the capacity to regain momentum in sectors where Ukraine shows weaknesses. The fog of war means open source verification is difficult, claims on both sides may be inflated or selective. The strategic cost. Pushing too far or attempting operations without consolidation can lead to high casualties, logistic strain, and morale damage if things falter. What to watch for next? Given the above, here are some of the key things to monitor. Whether Ukrainian forces can sustain their momentum, can they not only hit Russian positions but hold and exploit gains? How Russia responds. Will Moscow shift reserve units, reorganize forces, increase artillery or air strikes, or alter its strategic posture? Whether Ukraine uses this opportunity to disrupt other Russian operations, logistics hubs, fuel supplies, command nodes, to compound the effect. The international dimension. Will partners of Ukraine step up aid, munitions or intelligence based on the indication of Ukrainian capability? Will Russia's allies respond differently to rising Russian defensive burdens? Any shifts in war narrative inside Russia? How Moscow frames this Ukrainian initiative domestically may signal how worried it is. The broader meaning. Beyond immediate tactics, this moment may mark a turning point in how the war is fought. When one side shifts from enduring and reacting to initiative, the war's character changes. Ukraine's ability to undertake counterattacks, to target threatening sectors, to influence Russian decision-making behind the front lines, signals that the war may be entering a more fluid phase. For years, much of the war was about positional fighting, attrition, slow gains, trenches and defensive stalemates. If Ukraine can change that dynamic, even partially, the war's scale and tempo may shift. Why this is, sending shockwaves through Moscow. Let's break down why this language fits. The idea of shockwaves implies that Moscow is feeling something its command, public or forces did not fully expect, a disruption, an unraveling of assumptions. For Moscow, the assumption might have been that Russian depth and rear areas were secure, that Ukraine could be contained or worn down. Now Ukraine is reaching beyond the anticipated front lines and altering the balance. The shock is both operational and psychological. Operational because Russia must reassess defense and resource allocation, psychological because it undermines the narrative of control and inevitability. When an adversary is forced back on its heels, confidence weakens. When previously safe areas become contested, the sense of vulnerability increases. Future of the war. Looking ahead, some possible outcomes include: Ukraine uses this moment to further press into opportunities, stretching Russian defensive lines, forcing Moscow into a more reactive mode. Russia may respond with increased resources, heavier firepower, deeper reserves, or shift its strategic axis, a more violent phase ahead. The war could become more mobile, with Ukraine trying to leverage flexibility, innovation like drone strikes, asymmetric operations, to offset Russia's numerical and material advantages. Political and diplomatic pressure may rise. If Ukraine shows strong performance, partners may raise assistance. Conversely, Russia may face growing internal costs, dissent, or fatigue. The war's endgame may shift. While earlier much focus was on holding the line or stabilizing, now the idea of gaining strategic initiative or leveraging operations for negotiating power becomes more relevant. In summary, this Ukrainian counterattack is significant in multiple dimensions: tactical, strategic, psychological, and geopolitical. It signals that Ukraine is not only defending, but contesting, striking, and aiming to drive the terms of engagement. For Moscow, it creates new headaches, forces recalculations, and exposes vulnerabilities. The phrase, shockwaves through Moscow, is apt because this development isn't just another headline, it represents a shift in role, initiative, and momentum. Whether Ukraine can sustain this and convert it into long-term strategic advantage remains to be seen. Wars are long, complex, and full of reversals. But this is undeniably a moment worth paying attention to. Thank you all for watching and staying updated. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next breakdown on how this war evolves. I'll see you in the next video.